Hello and welcome. I'm Leigh-Ann Gerrans and you're watching W News, broadcasting live from the Al Arabiya studios. These are our top stories. Ukraine's President Zelenskyy is holding peace-planned talks in London with EU leaders as Trump claims he hasn't read the proposals. Syrian President Ahmed al-Sharaa urges civilians to work together to rebuild their country a year after former ruler Bashar al-Assad was ousted. And Hollywood's award season kicks off as the nominees of next year's Golden Globes are announced. Ukraine's President Zelenskyy is in London today, holding talks with EU leaders, including British Prime Minister Keir Starmer, French President Emmanuel Macron and German Chancellor Friedrich Merz. They'll be discussing the latest peace plan that was drafted alongside US officials last week. Ahead of the talks, Keir Starmer said, "We stand with Ukraine." Last night, President Trump claims Zelenskyy hadn't read the proposal yet. Take a listen.
I'm a little bit disappointed that President Zelenskyy hasn't yet read the proposal. That was as of a few hours ago. His people love it, but he hasn't. Russia's fine with it. Russia, I guess, would rather have the whole country when you think of it. But Russia is, I believe, fine with it, but I'm not sure that Zelenskyy is fine with it. His people love it, but he hasn't read it.
For more on this, I'm joined by Senior Advisor for the PR company Burson Global and former Director of Political Operations for Tony Blair, John McTernan. John, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Thank you for joining me. I find this situation slightly curious. The suggestion from Donald Trump that Zelenskyy has not read the proposals, then Zelenskyy saying he's not yet been fully briefed by his team. As we saw, Zelenskyy was in Downing Street today to meet Keir Starmer and the leaders of France and Germany. Where are we in this process at the moment?
Look, I think where we are is President Zelenskyy is trying to maintain relations with the United States of America. So he's trying to avoid saying that President Trump's proposals for peace are a betrayal of Ukraine, a betrayal of the Ukrainian people, a betrayal of their sovereignty, and rolling over completely to the aggression, the war aggression, and the demands of President Putin. It's not possible for Zelenskyy to say that. It's much easier to say, I've not read the documents or I've not been fully briefed on them. I don't. Because that way you can say, I won't go into any detail and you can raise detail with me. No, I've not been fully briefed. I want to discuss this with the major interlocutors in Europe, people who've been backing me, the German Chancellor, the President of France, the UK Prime Minister, the bloc of people who are articulating the powers within Europe to say, actually, there are resources, frozen resources, from Russia, there's resources we can use, there's supply chains we can fill, the support we can give, because Zelenskyy sees what's happening at the moment is an attempt to undermine him, undermine his country, undermine his independence, and undermine the operations of Europe. And in a way, that was made clear, wasn't it, by the Americans when they published their national security strategy last week, in which they made really clear that they have contempt for Europe, the democracies in Europe, and are expressing kind of full support for the far-right parties in opposition in Germany, in Great Britain, in France. And so there's a very delicate situation where across NATO, there are alliances that depend on the United States and its commitment to Europe and to collective self-defense. But at the same time, Zelenskyy sees that if President Trump had his way, Russia would gain far more of Ukraine than they currently even occupy.
So the Europeans are already bankrolling the Ukrainian government. They are buying US weapons through a NATO facility and giving them to Ukraine. How much are they prepared to keep supporting Ukraine?
Well, I think that, look, you can see the discussions going on about how can you unlock some of the frozen assets? How can you unlock things which are held within Belgium? How much can other European countries come together to give an indemnity to the Belgian government if court actions taken by Russia? It's a very complicated situation we're in. And what this requires is a real step up of European solidarity. Because, you know, as you've been saying, there's been found a way to use money to buy material, which can then be deployed, and that's been really central to bridging the gap that Ukraine's found with the switch of support. They had strong support from President Biden, much more tepid support from President Trump, and really this is a growing up process we're going through. Europe is seeing acted out in Ukraine the fact that the US is no longer a dependable, reliable ally in the way it's been throughout the post-war period. That America's choosing to go its own way. Europe has to be able to stand on its own, and that means Europe outside the European Union, bigger than that. Europe plus Great Britain. Europe, you see the growth of NATO with the countries that have been neutral becoming members of NATO. That European collective self-defense is going to be driven by the Germans and driven by the French and by the British, and it's those things, the core of that whole relationship of the three countries and the Ukrainian president, that's going to be at the core of it. So what's being done to support Zelenskyy, President Zelenskyy, is actually importantly going to be, I think, the bones of a new European defence and security arrangement.
So let's talk about Europe. Its financial commitment to Ukraine far outstrips America, but they have had no say at the negotiating table when we look at things really closely. Now, with Russia, John, appearing to have the US in their corner in negotiations and, of course, the upper hand on the battlefield, is it time for Ukraine to give up territory and concede some of its red lines in order to make a deal with the US and accept this plan?
So the first thing to say is the peace deal has to be with the aggressor. Thankfully, the United States is not an aggressor in this one. The peace deal is between Ukraine and Russia. Russia invaded. Russia believed they'd have a blitzkrieg. Russia believed they'd topple Zelenskyy within weeks. This has not happened. Russia is having to basically throw young Russians into a meat grinder to gain small amounts of territory. If there is, in the end, a peace treaty, and there has to be a peace treaty to end a war, that peace treaty has got to be acceptable to both the sides, Russia and Ukraine. And I could talk a lot about Ukraine, but it's clear President Putin has no intention of accepting even this sweetheart deal that President Trump has offered to him. Now, in that situation, there's no point for Ukraine to talk about whether he should re-examine his red lines. The point is, Ukraine has shown that Russians, they have to pay a huge cost in blood and treasure, a huge cost in young people's lives to gain small amounts of territory. This deal offers huge amounts of the Donetsk areas that are not occupied by Russia, not even close to being occupied by Russia, being offered to them by President Trump behind President Zelensky's back, behind the back of the Ukrainian people. I don't think there's any need for the Ukrainians to look at any of those questions around red lines, because at the moment, President Putin has shown he wants to play for time. He believes he's got more bodies he can throw at this. His problem should be his economy. It's like an economy, the Russian economy, is smaller than that of Switzerland on its own. The European countries together dwarf the size of the Russian economy. Russia's got 16% interest rates at the moment to try to control the wartime economy and the inflation that generates. So there's more than one force moving in this. And I think it's possible for the European Union and European countries to do more to stop and inspect the vessels that are smuggling out Russian oil. People know there's Russian oil being smuggled out. There's more can be done to constrain that, constrict that. And there's more that can be done to put pressure on Russia. I think that's where Europe has got to have this multilateral strategy. Obviously trying to keep Zelenskyy safe, trying to stay close within NATO to President Trump. I think Prime Minister Starmer does a good job of being close to Donald Trump. But Donald Trump can have his say. He can't have his way, because his way would be the betrayal of Ukraine.
And also, when we talk about sanctions, they have been critical that the US could have put more on Russia to squeeze it harder, which they haven't done. But John, let's talk about talks over the UK joining the EU Defence Fund. They have broken down, and this breakdown is all over money. Is this a gift to the Russian President Putin, seeing the cracks in this relationship here when it does come to the defence fund?
Look, you and your viewers will know very well that one thing about defence industries is that every country has got its own domestic defence producers, and every country, while it promises to invest in other people's weapons if they're better, by and large wants to buy its own, and that's the same with European countries as it is with the UK. And there's got to be a breakthrough on this, that European countries can't just make Britain pay for joining this, because Britain is a major contributor. It's one of the three pillars of European collective defence. We are one of the three nuclear powers, together with France and the US. And so on its own, France and Britain are central to the defence of Europe. And so a way through has got to be found on this. But that's the nature of diplomacy. That's the nature of deals. That's the nature of all transnational conversations. They have to be long-term conversations, and they do sometimes take a long time. But in the end, when the purpose is understood, which I think it is, which is that we're strengthening collective security, strengthening each other's defence industries, strengthening our own capabilities, making sure they lock together, that strategic, how the Defence Fund operates in the end is a process question. What the Defence Fund is for is a purpose, which is for collective self-defence. And as long as that prize is kept in mind, the other stuff can be done.
John McTernan, great to have you on and your insights. Thank you for your time. Let's continue this conversation with John Cavelich, a senior editor for outcome modelling analysis at Issue Insight. John, great to have you on the show. First of all, President Zelenskyy has been holding meetings with Starmer, Macron and Merz at Downing Street. What were the leaders discussing?
You had three members of the Coalition of the Willing meeting for 2.5 hours or so, and for some aspects of this, it's a little rally, singing "Kumbaya." We're with you. We'll be as long as it takes, as long as it's necessary. But in the end, they come out, they smile, they take pictures together. But Ukraine is a commodity for the European Union and NATO, and meaning its price fluctuates. And right now, its value isn't high enough for the European Union collectively, or leadership collectively, NATO leadership collectively, to make any demonstrative decision that would have any long-lasting implication to help Ukraine and also to be dissuasive to Russia.
So, John, this leaves President Zelenskyy, who is now flying to Belgium for another busy afternoon of diplomacy, in a really tricky position, doesn't it? What leverage does he have left in order to get the Europeans on side, as if they can make these big decisions, and the US to come back to the table?
Well, earlier, President Zelenskyy said that the US, Ukraine and Russia are not on the same page in terms of how they define the documents, plural, that have been shared during the last week. So that's one great problem he faces. And the second is when you have President Macron of France, Chancellor Merz of Germany, Prime Minister Starmer of the UK, meeting because basically they're concerned that the outcome of the war may not be favorable to Ukraine. Well, it is going to be unfavorable to Ukraine. As your previous guest said, that is one of the realities where there's an aggressor, there's a victim. Generally, the victim isn't the one that determines how the aggressor is going to stop. The aggressor determines that. And so President Zelenskyy now goes and is going to have a meeting at the residence of the NATO Secretary General Rutte. He's going to be having dinner with Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the European Commission, with Mr. Costa, the President of the European Council. Again, performative, and nice meetings, smiles, etc. But does this move the ball? And I don't think it does, because right now the discussion is all about money. We're talking about the $320 billion in frozen Russian assets. And what I would like to see is for the European Union and NATO to put aside the 320 and say, okay, we froze it. It's supposed to be for Ukraine's reconstruction. That's why they froze it. Put it aside. Now, how much is everybody collectively willing to put into the kitty to help Ukraine? And that number is going to be really, really low. And that's why Ukraine is somewhat of a commodity. And it's a tragedy, but that's basically what's happened.
And let's talk a little bit about what Trump said. He said the Ukrainian people loved his peace plan, and he was disappointed in Zelenskyy, John, for not reading the latest proposals. What do you make of these somewhat off-the-cuff remarks from the US president?
Well, unfortunately, with President Trump, almost all of his remarks are off the cuff. It's this, this stream of consciousness that comes out, and he speaks as a real estate promoter speaks, as a television personality speaks. Everything is the best. Everything's the biggest. Everybody loves everything, and it's cringeworthy to hear him say that the Ukrainian delegation loved the plan, because the original 28 points down to 18, 19, down from there. And then when everyone's admitted, and Keith Kellogg, who is the outgoing envoy for Ukraine in the Trump-Vance administration, former lieutenant general, he said out in California at a speech, I think that we're within 10 meters. But then you ask, okay, what outstanding, if you've had all this agreement, you've accomplished so much in these discussions, what are the few areas that still need to be addressed? Oh, security guarantees, territory, and the use of the assets. Well, excuse me, those are the three most important issues. So, President Trump's, his use of that word is really unfortunate. It's disrespectful to the Ukrainian people. No one loves anything. And this isn't, like going into, trying to sell an apartment and say, gee, it's lovely, I love it, and I want it.
And, I just want to get sort of the point of view from Moscow, because as you mentioned, there are various versions of the peace plan that are circulating. John, if anything, I know you said the Russians are the aggressors. What do you think they'll be willing to accept and concede to end the fighting, if anything?
Yeah, well, I've been privileged to see, some of the drafts, and some of what people think no longer are in these drafts are in these drafts. And there are a few instances where some of what's in the draft initially from Florida and Washington and Moscow that people thought were egregious, they become more egregious. So yeah, I really strain to see how people are, all excited about movement. But I think in the case of the Russian Federation, if, and they've said this, so this isn't anything profound, but President Putin wants all of Luhansk, all of Donetsk, all of Zaporizhzhia, all of Kherson. He holds anywhere Luhansk, like 98% of it. The others are in the 75 to 80+% range. One of the discussion topics has been that Ukraine would push the boundaries of those particular areas to the line of contact with the Russians. In that way, Ukraine wouldn't be giving up anything that it doesn't control, and Russia would be able to say, well, now we have 100% of these 4 oblasts. The Russians aren't, terribly excited about it. The Ukrainians aren't as well, but the choices for President Putin and President Zelenskyy are basically, when have enough people died in each country that we have to call it a day? When have we reached that political number in Moscow and in Kiev that we just can't sacrifice any more people because domestically, politically, it's just untenable? The tragedy is Russia hasn't reached their number. Ukraine hasn't reached its number. And so this is likely to continue for a while, because even if Ukraine gets all of this weaponry that it wants and that it's been promised and that it's been offered, it still lacks bodies. It still lacks numbers. And that's the biggest problem it's facing, where you can have an electronic war, you can have drone war, you can have firing missiles, but you still need people to do it. And they still have contact, they still have actual fighting, as opposed to just launching projectiles at one another. And that's where Ukraine is is really having an issue putting people on the battlefield. And that's where the Russians are prepared by attrition, as your other guest said. It's costing Russia a lot of people per square foot to get what it wants, but it's still prepared to do that.
John Cavalage, thank you so much. A grim thought there, but great analysis. Syrian President Ahmed al-Sharaa has urged civilians to work together to rebuild their country as they mark a year since the ousting of ruler Bashar al-Assad. Al-Sharaa led an alliance that took the capital Damascus this time last year after nearly 14 years of war, putting an end to more than 5 decades of the al-Assad family's rule. For more on this, I'm joined from Manchester by Dr. Hamoud Obaid. Thank you so much for joining me this evening, Dr. Hamoud.
Thank you for having me.
It's a
Thanks
pleasure. So Syria is marking 1 year since the fall of Bashar al-Assad. People are gathering in Damascus for a military parade today and celebrations. How are Syrians feeling 12 months on from the fall of the regime?
If you were to ask me 12 months ago, around this time last year, what is your, if I was asked to write a scenario of what's going to happen if HTS, which was ruling the northeast and northwest of Syria, were to take over from Bashar in a military offensive, what scenario would I imagine? I think the words bloodbath, massacre, killing these words would be featuring quite strongly in that scenario. I would never have dreamt that the words extreme jubilation and ecstatic featuring in my scenario. So that's how we feel now. What we imagined was going to happen didn't happen. Assad was deposed in a very efficient way, so to speak. Syria has been more or less very stable since his fall. So to add to the Syrian people's happiness by the fall of Assad's regime, the situation after the fall has added to their feelings of happiness, really.
And I want to talk to you a little bit about Syria. It's still facing many obstacles after 14 years of civil war. What are the main challenges the Syrian people are still facing? Because not much reconstruction has happened over the last 12 months, and there's a lot of poverty in the country.
Of course, yes. Syrian people who are now in control, more or less, of their country, have inherited a very grim picture. The country is on the ground on all levels. Infrastructure was deliberately destroyed. The country's resources were stolen. So all of these are things that the Syrians, have to deal with. But I believe the Syrian people have proved that they are more than capable of dealing with that. There are threats to Syria, as you mentioned now, internally and externally, threats to our sovereignty, threats to Syria's unity. and other, as you said, economic problems being faced. I believe that the international community needs to step in, because we can't do this on our own. However, the first and most important factor in Syria's rejuvenation, renaissance, is Syrian peoples coming together, hand in hand, building their country.
And I was actually just going to touch on something that you mentioned there. There's been a huge international effort to help Syria. Al-Shara, of course, went to the White House last month where he met Donald Trump, and some of the sanctions on Syria were lifted. Do you think the international community is helping the country enough?
I believe it has been a mixed basket, really, of we can't really talk about the international community as one response. A lot of countries like the UK, like the US, have been supportive of Syria, like Saudi Arabia, like Turkey, but there are other regional and international players who are not so thrilled about what is happening in Syria. And I'm talking in particular about our neighbors, you know who stepped onto Syrian territory recently. Yes, help is coming from international community, but as politicians know very well, help always comes with a price. These international players would perhaps have their own demands with their support. But I'd like to remind these powers that Al-Shara and his government are only as successful as the people support them. So if international powers force the Syrian government to take decisions that are not popular among the Syrians, the government will lose its support, and that is a losing gambit overall.
Dr. Hamoud Obaid, it was brilliant to speak to you. Thank you so much for your thoughts and also sharing what it's like 1 year on from the fall of the Bashar al-Assad regime in Syria. Cambodia is protesting after Thai airstrikes prompted fresh fighting between the neighbouring countries. Both countries accuse the other of breaching a ceasefire deal that was brokered in October. At least one Thai soldier has been killed and at least 8 others have been wounded in the fighting. Chris Gilbert reports.
Once again, fleeing to safety. Residents of villages along the Thailand-Cambodia border were forced to find shelter again on Monday as the fragile peace between the two countries collapsed. Thailand says it launched airstrikes on Cambodian military targets along the disputed border. It says Cambodia made the first move, mobilizing heavy weaponry, repositioning combat units, and preparing to escalate conflict. But Cambodia rejects this and is looking to other countries to counter what it calls Thai aggression.
Cambodia appeals to the international community to condemn this Thailand's illegal activities, which violate the joint declaration of peace agreement. We demand Thailand take responsibility for this aggression and stop its violent acts immediately, which threatens peace and stability in the region.
Cambodia's military says it's not responded yet, while Thailand is rejecting the accusation of aggression, saying it's simply defending its sovereignty.
Thailand never wants to see violence. We insist that Thailand has never initiated the clashes or encroached into their land whatsoever. But Thailand will not stand for its sovereignty being violated and will proceed with appropriate measures, caution, and adhere to peace, stability, and uphold humanitarian aspects.
The two countries signed what they call a pathway to peace at the ASEAN summit in Malaysia in October, following a 5-day conflict in July. It was brokered by the US and Malaysia, with US President Donald Trump taking credit for it. But the border dispute was never resolved. The countries have contested sovereignty of several points of the 817-kilometre border since the days of French colonial rule more than a century ago. There have been multiple skirmishes and attempts at peace in that time. Tensions erupted again in May this year after the killing of a Cambodian soldier in gunfire, and have escalated since. There are concerns this time the fighting may continue. Chris Gilbert, Arabiya English.
Now, Paramount has launched a $108.4 billion hostile bid for Warner Brothers, challenging Netflix, which had reached a $72 billion takeover deal with the company. It comes after President Trump said he'll be involved in the deal between Netflix and Warner Brothers Discovery after raising concerns about Netflix's big market share and the firm's combined size, saying it could be a problem. For more on this, I'm joined by our correspondent Nick Harper, and he is in Washington. In the last few hours, Nick, there has been an unexpected twist in this deal with Paramount's hostile bid. Can you tell us a little bit more?
That's right, Leigh-Ann. Certainly a bit of a surprise, this one. Somewhat unexpected, considering the fact that Netflix deal had been agreed by Warner Brothers. Paramount was the studio that lost out on the bidding war, losing out to Netflix, but now it's swooping in, hoping to try and offer this hostile bid. We're hearing that Paramount is offering more per share, $30 per share, compared to Netflix, $27.75 per share. And also, this would be a larger deal in terms of what Paramount would hope to take. Netflix deal means that it would be taking the TV and streaming services from Warner Brothers. Paramount, instead, though, wants to take absolutely everything, the full package, including the cable channels currently owned by Warner Brothers. In terms of the funding for all of this, we're hearing that Paramount would front money coming from Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and the UAE, and also money coming from Affinity Partners. That's an investment firm that's headed up by the son-in-law of the US President Donald Trump, Jared Kushner. It is a very sizable package. It's unclear exactly how successful this takeover bid might be, and it could potentially lead to a very messy and very public series of negotiations and discussions to try and force this through and get rid of that Netflix deal.
Fascinating stuff, Nick, but this comes after President Trump seemed sceptical on the next Netflix deal. What did he have to say about that deal?
That's right. He was asked by reporters exactly what he thought about all this. He said it could be a problem. The reason being, quite simply, Netflix would have a huge monopoly. He put it down to them having a very big market share, because there is that fear from industry insiders that simply Netflix would just own and control too much of the industry and potentially could move it in a direction that perhaps traditional studios don't want. Donald Trump also saying that he wants to be part of the decision-making in all of this. He says that he's going to be consulting with some economists, and he does want to be involved in the decision. The final decision, of course, is still needed in order to get this Netflix deal approved.
And the deal, of course, still needs to go through regulatory approval. How difficult could this be considering competition?
Well, the competition, the antitrust element of all of this, the fact that there will be this huge monopoly that Netflix will have. There are various hoops that need to be jumped through. Now, normally US presidents would not get involved in these sort of mergers or deals. But of course, Donald Trump, he has that business background. He loves to get involved. We're told that there has even been, at the highest level, lobbying from Netflix, the CEO reportedly coming to the White House in November to speak to Donald Trump to try and help ease the passage of this deal. But then there's also the possibility that Netflix would need approval from the European Commission, from other governments around the world as well. And interesting to note, now there is this Paramount bid, there could potentially be a conflict of interest, considering some of the funding would be coming from Jared Kushner. Unclear exactly where that would put Donald Trump if he were to be one of the people involved in the decision-making of who takes over Warner Brothers. But Donald Trump has in the past been involved in these big type of mergers. Back in July. He was involved in giving the approval for Paramount to combine with Skydance. And at the time, Paramount paid Donald Trump $16 million, funds that will go towards his future presidential library. That was all to do with how an interview with Kamala Harris, his rival in last year's election, was edited. But certainly it seems like it did ease the way in terms of Donald Trump giving sign-off for that deal for Paramount.
It's absolutely fascinating stuff, Nick. It could make for a Netflix drama, dare I say it. But let's just talk about one other thing that's been happening today. The Golden Globe nominations have just been announced, and there are plenty of Netflix productions nominated. Who's leading the different categories?
That's right, Leigh-Ann. Amazingly, we're already at that part in the year where we're talking about awards ceremony. And of course, the Golden Globes really kicks off awards season. So it's really a first take on who is leading the pack in terms of the actors, but also the productions who could scoop the awards. Golden Globes take place on January the 11th. In terms of leading the pack, most nominations in total goes to Paul Thomas Anderson's movie One Battle After Another, picking up 9 nominations. Of course, Leonardo DiCaprio, the main actor in that one. Sentimental Value has 8 nods. And then Sinners, the vampire movie that centres around racism in the south of America, has 7. Those are the movies. In terms of the TV shows, White Lotus, HBO's production, has 6 in total. Of course, HBO would be part of that Netflix deal that it would take ownership of if it manages to secure that. And there are some sizable Netflix shows nominated as well. Limited series Adolescence has 5 nods. That's the second place down from White Lotus, and also Beast in Me. But interesting to note, when it comes to studio nominations, Netflix hasn't done particularly well. Neon, that's an indie production house, leads the way in terms of studios. 21 nominations in total. Then Warner Brothers with 16, and then Netflix with 13. And just a couple of notable snubs in all of this. Wicked, the second instalment of that movie, Wicked for Good, that did not receive a Best Film nomination. The Netflix movie J. Kelly, starring George Clooney and Adam Sandler, didn't get any Best Drama nominations. And Superman, the big movie of the summer, no nominations at all. So a very big snub there for that movie.
And there's a new category this year. What do we know about it?
Yeah, interesting, this one. It's a podcasting category. The Golden Globes, of course, traditionally looks at both film and TV, unlike the Oscars that just concentrates on movies. Golden Globes really showing how important the podcasting genre has become in recent times. If we think back this time 12 months ago, how influential many podcasts were when it came to the 2024 political election. There were some right-wing conservative podcasters out there really helping to propel Donald Trump to the White House. But there were snubs for those right-wing conservative hosts of those podcasts, including Joe Rogan, Ben Shapiro, Tucker Carlson. In total, the Golden Globes seem to be looking more towards personality-driven podcasts and shying away from those political ones. So the ones that have been nominated, there was a total of 25 shows that are eligible, 6 in the category, including Alex Cooper's Call Her Daddy, Good Hang with Amy Poehler, and also Smartless by Will Arnett and Jason Bateman. But all of it very much showing podcasting, hugely influential, hugely important, something that many people are tapped into nowadays.
I must say something, Nick. I absolutely love Call Her Daddy. It's such a great podcast. I was very happy to see that it was nominated. Thank you so much for all of that news for us. Thanks, Nick. Let's take a look at some of the other stories making the headlines today. A powerful 7.6 magnitude earthquake has struck off northern Japan, triggering a tsunami of up to 40 centimeters in coastal communities in the region. That's according to the Japanese Meteorological Agency. The epicenter of the quake was 80 kilometers off the coast of Aomori. An unnamed person who was arrested in Iran during the 12-day war with Israel has been charged with spying. Iran's judiciary said a court has begun hearing their case, where they are accused of intelligence cooperation and espionage in the interests of the Zionist regime. It described the individual as a dual national who lives in a European country. Turning to all the sports news now, and former Manchester United striker Wayne Rooney says Liverpool forward Mohamed Salah is destroying his own legacy. This comes after Salah's outburst that the club had thrown him under the bus and that his relationship with head coach Arne Slot had broken down. Rooney has urged Slot to exclude Salah from playing in Tuesday's Champions League game at Inter Milan. And Lando Norris secured his first Formula One World Championship on Sunday with a third-place finish at the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. Norris, who won by 2 points, ended Red Bull's Max Verstappen's four-season run as a champion. However, Verstappen won the Formula One Abu Dhabi Grand Prix, while Australia's Oscar Piastri finished second. A reminder of our top stories. Ukraine's president is holding peace plan talks in London with EU leaders as Trump claims he hasn't read the proposals. Syrian President Ahmed al-Sharaa urges civilians to work together to rebuild their country a year after former ruler Bashar al-Assad was ousted. And Hollywood's award season kicks off as the nominees of next year's Golden Globes are announced. And that's all from us on W News. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and follow us on X. The Rail Deal is coming up next. Plus, we'll be back in a couple of hours with W News Extra. Goodbye and thank you.